Hello everyone, we're here at the Carbon 12 Gallery in Al Serkal Avenue in Dubai, and we're going to have a private tour of Ghazel's show Mea Culpa by one of the co-founders of the gallery, Kourosh, who's right here.
Hi guys.
Welcome
to Carbon 12.
So Ghazel is an Iranian artist who was actually born in Tehran, right? And who I found out, interestingly, studied in the city where I'm from, in Montpellier, in France, and now lives between Paris and Iran. So tell us more about the artist and about the show.
So Ghazel is one of those artists from the 90s, one of the among the Iranian diaspora who brought the concept of art production from Iran in the 90s. You should keep in mind that in the early 90s, especially, the relationship between Iran and France was terrible, you know. So it was kind of refreshing to see for the French audience, particularly, and museums and institutions, that there are actually Iranians doing something else than politics and terrorism and so on, you know. So this is how Ghazel became very famous in the 90s, you know, through her videos, the Me series. And interesting enough, in this show, we are showing certain number of installations, and the first time the artist approached cartography in her practice, you know. So this is I think that's an extremely important artwork of the artist. It's a print from 1990, based on a telex she received from her father in 1988, you know. So that was the high war between Iran and Iraq. People couldn't communicate. The dad just sent the telex. At that time, we didn't have fax or email or WhatsApp or whatever. So we're all well, don't worry. The dad's name was Ali Reza, you know. So for the first time, 2 years later, the artist includes the aesthetic of cartography on one of those, on the telex that she has received, you know.
That's incredible.
And this is a superb artwork. And also it shows us that actually an artist's practice goes back to 26 years ago, you know. And the relevance of this, it's not a retrospective what we're seeing there, but it's also very relevant to see that 26 years later, 25 years later, the artist is developing much further their practice with cartography, you know. So come with me a little bit closer. So for example, when you look at those Iranian maps, she purchases in stationery shop those Iranian maps, and then she uses the ballpoint pen, because that was the way the entire series started. For sure you have a lot of reflection, huh?
Now we see us,
yeah?
we don't see the maps anymore.
Exactly.
So let's back up a little bit.
Exactly.
So these are actually maps.
Those are maps that she buys in stationery shops in Tehran. So those are maps of Iran, and then as you can see, the upper map is exactly as it is, the lower map is upside down. And typical of Ghazel's practice with those maps, the use of ballpoint pen until the pen runs out of ink. And for the series that we're looking at, which is the Phoenix series, there is a very intensive use of blue, because blue in the tradition of Persian or Iranian architecture, you find a lot of turquoise, light blue, dark blues, you know. This one for the artist, it evokes the blue of Isfahan, you know.
And so do you think she gets to use only one pen for the whole work, or she actually needs to use more?
She does use one pen, because the first time we showed those maps, they were called the lifespan of a ballpoint pen, and it was until the one pen runs out of ink, you know. And this is how all those symbols came to life, you know. The trees, the hearts, the sun, the house, the suitcases, you know. Those symbols, those recurrent symbols in her work keep on coming, and very often, even in her videos, I mean, shortly before you started to film, we're looking at the still of a video where she's on a blackboard putting a tree with solid roots, and where people are hanging from it, you know. So this practice is really like kind of a center of her work, you know.
And so here we see her folding maps into planes, right?
Exactly, and she throws them in that room. It's also a very interesting, for the first time, like there is those planes or those maps take a shape, you know. You
Yeah.
can see it on that installation, you know. So basically those maps have been turned into typical planes that we learn how to
Yeah.
build at school. And the fact of throwing them also is kind of a funny reference to the fact that we never know where this geopolitics is going to take us, you know. So there is a lot of references. It's also very performative. So that's kind of interesting in a show that the artist doesn't put the center of her practice, which is performance. She uses a different way of performing that.
And why do you think she chooses trees and hearts to
You know what I think
draw with her pen?
in geo, I mean, it's kind of an appropriation of geopolitics. I mean, she makes her own geopolitics. And when we live somewhere, we need a tree, we need a house, we need a sun, we need the heart. So basically, all those very funny symbols that we, from childhood, we learn that you live where your heart is, or where your shelter is, your house, blah, blah, blah. All those things that as a child that we come across, it becomes a center element of our compositions, you know.
And I read that this is the first time in 20 years that she's doing sculpture.
That's true.
And it was very interesting to find out about this installation right here.
Wait, stay with me, come back up. Yeah, exactly. Not trying to film it. So this form is the simplification of a bird, okay?
I can see that.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. From that angle, you can see it very clearly. And the artist, remember, the artist has a very, very strong attraction towards cinematography, you know. She studied cinematography, filming, and so on, you know. So the same as the houses that you see here and those birds, those are tracking shots. So when the camera is fixed next to an object and is rolling on a track, you know. So basically, instead of seeing just this side of a house, you see the house multiplied by 30, you know. The same thing with the birds, you know. So it was kind of interesting that after so many years, you have site-specific installations from the artist, you know. It adds a lot to the show, you know.
It's really a matter of perspective here.
Completely.
Because if you stand right
see
underneath
something
it,
completely
you
different,
see
yeah.
absolutely. You see more like a roof.
But that's also the idea of visually representing a tracking shot, you know? Because look, in contemporary art is how we turn a concept into an object or into something visual, you know. So if I ask you now, okay, represent tracking shot for me, like the traveling, as the French call it, you know. So how would you do it? I think this is the best example, you know. So basically, you take a very graphic simplification of a bird, and by folding two metal sheets, you turn that into a tracking shot. The same thing she did for the houses. You know? I mean, purposely it's mal fait, or it has this very strong art de pauvre element to it, where you don't have a craftsmanship put into it. But I think conceptually, both the houses and the birds are absolutely brilliant. You know?
Let's try to have a closer look again at the trees that are here on these pieces.
Here you might even see them without reflection, maybe.
I can almost feel anger in the way that the trees are drawn.
Yeah, you know what? I mean, this look. I mean, great artists are obsessive, and obsession also has a there is an angry side to it, you know. So the way, for example, interesting enough, now you see the trees are much more defined. If you look at the first work from 2010, from the first series of maps she did, you compare those trees to those ones, you see actually, funnily enough, the works are more settled, they are more friendly almost, and there is an aesthetic element into it. So the formalism of those maps compared to the early work is, it's significantly higher, you know.
And you can see that the maps are flipped too, or
Absolutely.
at least they're not positioned in the way that they should
so
be.
that series called Dyslexia, she's referring to, I mean, it's a visual representation of the dyslexia of the world, where we have this tendency to mix things up, forget about things, not putting them into context. So, for example, these two maps are head to head against each other, and these two maps are button to button next to each other. So again, it becomes a kind of a visual appropriation of the map, you know, because how often do you see a map hanging like this? Almost never, you know. So that's very interesting about the artist. You know, she did the Phoenix series with the Iranian maps and the Dyslexia series with the world maps.
Very interesting. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. You're getting good at that, huh? I still.
We're still on.
Or
I don't know.
it's okay.